Thank you all so much for joining us for this session of the first ever National Youth Filmmaker Summit. Really excited to talk to the filmmakers behind the film On the Divide, both of whom are Nifty alumni, and they are also both fellows of the Jacob Burns Film Center. And we are so excited to welcome the program director of that fellowship program, Sean Weiner, to come and moderate this conversation today. Welcome, Sean. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Really glad to be here with you and to be part of the Youth Filmmaker Summit. I wanted to welcome Leah Galant and Maya Cueva, who are the co-directors of On the Divide, and also folks that Nifty and I personally know really well, and I'm thrilled to talk to. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, good to see you, Sean.
Nice to see you, Leah. You guys are, so Leah is currently in Berlin and Maya is currently in Berkeley? Where are you right now?
I'm in Berkeley.
So the first three letters are exactly the same. Which is entirely intentional. So the idea of the conversation today is, and for those who watch a multitude of these videos at the summit, the idea is just, these are kind of called above the line, and there are opportunities to kind of go behind the scenes and just kind of dig into what the process was for filmmakers making their first feature, working on a feature, what it is to realize a feature. And so today we're talking to Maya and Leah about a nonfiction feature. And then I'll also be talking to Olivia and Jess about their narrative film, Tahara. So sort of have a narrative and nonfiction version. And in that way, I would really like to just walk through the kind of phases of production so that we can kind of engage with, the questions, the challenges, maybe some of the epiphanies or the realizations that you guys are having along the way making a film. Recognizing that a nonfiction, a documentary feature gets made over a long period of time, which will likely be a lot of our conversation. So to start at kind of the beginning, I'd just love for you guys to sort of share who you are, how you got involved in filmmaking, and how you found one another, and embarked on this process of being co-directors together.
Yeah, so Leah and I actually met in college at Ithaca College. We both went there. And we had known each other, but we didn't really become close until we both took a class together. It was called Documentary Workshop. It was our senior class, and it was sort of like a senior thesis type of class. And it was in that class that we ended up having to create a 15-minute short documentary. It was sort of trying to represent what the industry would look like. So we ended up finding an article about a traveling abortion doctor who travels from New Mexico to Texas. And we had never heard of that profession ever needing to exist. And we ended up pitching that and got greenlit by a professor at the time, which is so funny to say. And we ended up making a short documentary together. And it was our first, both of us had made short films. I know Leah had a little bit more experience at the time making some other films. That was really our first film that we got to collaborate together on. And it's called The Provider. And that ended up going to South by Southwest and some other festivals. And it was actually during The Provider that we were filming in Texas, we made our way to the border and saw that there was only one abortion clinic there. And we ended up attending a women's rights rally in Brownsville in the Rio Grande Valley, and really felt wow, this story is really important, but it it could be its own film, really. So it was after filming there and then graduating that we ended up reconnecting with the abortion clinic there, clinic workers, organizers, and started filming On the Divide. So it's been a 7-year journey. And along the way, that's where we were able to meet Ray and Mercedes and Denise, who are the three people that we are following in the film. And I don't know if Leah wants to say anything else.
I'm just glad that we got randomly assigned to be in the same group in our senior capstone class. That could have ended very poorly, but ended very well. And so I'm just happy. Thank you, Ben Crane.
Do you think that connecting with each other in a way where you're like assigned that this started sort of professionally, that, you know, certainly like you knew each other, you were acquaintances, but the fact that like you got to know each other more professionally or as filmmakers sort of led to your ability, because I think co-directing is really difficult, right? I mean, certainly in any kind of, you know, the director has like a sense of like who they are and what their vision is. So how does one share their vision? And do you think starting off in a place where you were in those positions benefited your collaborative process?
Yeah, because I think when you hear a lot about co-director relationships, there's often like an inception of a project that has been like stirring for a while from one of the directors, and then they approach another director and they're like, can you direct this with me? But Maya and I really were in the discovery process together very much. And, you know, I think that definitely helped in terms of like aligning our visions together. And it didn't feel like, you know, one of us was like pitching the project to the other and tried to convince them. Like from the beginning, we were both very interested in reproductive rights as an issue, like been reading articles about the access in the South and the need for traveling abortion doctors. So I think, yeah, definitely being aligned in the beginning and having a very similar vision for even the project that we wanted to do within our group definitely was helpful. And then, like, you know, it was 7 years. So the first few years of, I would call that the development phase now. At the time, we thought we were making a movie immediately, but no, that was very much development. And those are the times when like Maya and I were really trying to find our voice as filmmakers, I think, and our styles as filmmakers. So we are really fortunate to have been at Jacob Burns Film Center doing the fellowships with the creative culture program during the time, because Maya and I were then practicing our own kind of filmmaking style and craft, like with the short films. And we were able to bring that together along with like reference films that we really admired. And that's when things started really shaping up for On the Divide, and when we really knew like, okay, this is our aligned vision, this is our aligned style. And then I think really what ended up happening is that we sort of understood like what's not under the surface, but we kind of understood each other in terms of what we wanted to get and how we wanted to tell the story, and that informed pretty much every shoot. Of course, disagreements come up. I mean, that's part of a collaboration, but the beautiful thing about when we had a disagreement was we would each share our perspective of, okay, this is what I think, this is what you think, and then we kind of like found a middle ground, and the middle ground ended up being like sometimes a better idea than, I think, if I can say so myself, than each of our individual ideas. So I think we did have that in our favor, where we like had this like merging of the minds happen a lot. And then of course, like there was times when like I would defer to Maya or Maya would defer to, you know, that was sort of, we just have a mutual respect, and, you know, and also like speaking things through. I think a lot of co-director relationships don't work out because they build up resentment for each other, or they don't talk about things as they come up. And like, you just have to be really transparent and honest, because it's gonna not go well. So I think we were, you know, great communicators as well. And so, yeah, I mean, it was very hard. Of course, most of the time it was just us on the ground in the beginning too. It wasn't easy. But luckily, you know, we did have each other, and when, you know, we were feeling like a little more dejected or unmotivated, the other would, you know, keep the spirits up. So yeah, I think that really helped a lot. And I'm sure Maya has thoughts on it too.
Yeah, I think I'll probably say similar things, but I think one of the big things, like for me, Leah and I, was that we were really learning together throughout this process. So when, you know, we were at Ithaca and we found this article about a traveling doctor, and then, you know, ended up calling a bunch of clinics and trying to find this doctor that we were going to follow for the short film. Like, we were both able to bounce ideas off each other, and we had like other people on our team, but I always really felt like Leah was someone that I could like look to also kind of like support me in that, and that she was like just as dedicated. And I think what also was really helpful is that like we really like complement each other in terms of like our ideas, but we have different skill sets too. So Leah is an amazing DP. We both were directing and producing, and then I can do sound. So that really helped us when we were on set, right? We could just bounce off of each other and really help each other in terms of, you know, Leah was filming most of the time, and then I was doing sound most of the time. And then we were both helping each other with questions or directing. And, you know, this is not an easy topic, especially because we're following people's lives and, you know, how they connect to this abortion clinic and how they connect to choice and how choice is necessary for survival and all these different things. So we were really, I mean, everything you see in the film, we were there on the ground, right? Behind the camera, running the sound. And a lot of the times it was really difficult to kind of manage those scenes and the production, everything. And we were kind of taking in a lot as we were filming. So it was just so important to have Leah as like a collaborative partner too, to also like help through those moments. Like, I think we were able to really help each other. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that from both of you. I think that gives a really cohesive view on like what collaboration looks like. And obviously I think with everybody, it's a little bit different because everybody's personality is different, but it's about finding like that balance. But to Leah's point, you know, it's like also about just finding a way to have real honesty and transparency, because there's no way it's going to be all roses the whole time. You know, it's like making films is really hard. It's very hard when you do it alone. It's nice to do it as a pair, but that also means that then you have somebody else who's feeling feelings along the way. So I think each situation is different, but that idea of like honesty and trust seems like always to be a through line. One of the things that you guys brought up was just the notion of making work along the way. You know, this is a long process. This was, you know, the film was made over the course of 7 years, and I want to talk a little bit more specifically about that process. But I also think that there's a misnomer or a fallacy out there that's like, okay, you make whatever it is, you make 2 or 3 short films, and then you level up, and now you're making feature work, and then you know, it's like that. There's this clear path of like how somebody who's working as a filmmaker functions, and that like some things are of greater value than others. But I know that with each of you, you've continued to make short form work. You've also continued to be involved in things like fellowship and residency opportunities along the way, right? It's not as if, okay, now I've made a feature film, so I'm not interested in a fellowship because I'm quote unquote past that, you know? So could you just share a little bit about, you know, I don't know, like maybe peeking behind the curtain on like just what the processes of living like a fulfilling life as a creative, and how that, I don't know, I mean, now I'm putting words in your mouth, but like how that might not be a linear path in the way that we're originally raised to think it might be.
Yeah, that's a great question. I definitely don't think it's a linear path. I think for both Leah and I, like Leah mentioned, like the Jacob Burns and you, Sean, like I'm not just saying this because we're talking to you, like we're so helpful in our journey of discovering our voice and figuring out, you know, what types of films we wanted to make. I think, you know, what was complicated was, we had finished The Provider, we were out of school, and then we started on The Divide, right? And we really didn't know like what we were doing. And for a long time, you know, it can get really hard when you're just working on one project for many years, and you might get rejected, and you might get like from grants and different things, and you might you know, get feedback like, what's the story, why are you making it, like all these different things. And you can start to feel really down as a filmmaker, like what am I doing here, like what is my voice, what kind of stories do I want to make. But I really felt like after, you know, Leah showed me that Leah had gone through the burns, and then she told me about it and I applied, that really helped me to be able to understand like, oh, there's other films I want to make, right? Like there's other stories that are out there. And I think like Leah said this before, like it really helped us get motivated to finish on The Divide, right? It's like, you don't just even though this, you know, might be a project you want to see through and you will see it through, you don't have to just work on that, right? And so I felt like fellowships like the Burns helped me to stay motivated on that project, create other films along the way that I could also, you know, be proud of. And I felt like fellowships, the other fellowships that I did, BAVAC, North Star, through Points North, there's like a number of different things I could list, but I think all of those also help just with like feedback and trying to figure out, you know, just like other people I would want to collaborate with, meeting with other peers, and just also figuring out like what other stories do I want to make. And I encourage anyone who's like trying to, you know, break in the film world, trying to get their first short started, to join fellowships, apply to fellowships, because those are really like I think a good launching point to get your films made.
Yeah, so thank you for that. Leah, I left a pause, seeing if you want to jump in. There was no jumping in, so I'm continuing the interview. Okay.
Maya nailed it.
Nailed it. So I want to just walk through a little bit of like the different phases that you went through in making On the Divide. You've answered some of these questions, but I guess specifically, did you know that this was a long form project out the gate? Did you just know it's going to be bigger and let's just see what it is? You know, at what point were you saying to one another, this is a feature? I think that it's easier in narratives to be like, okay, well, the script's 90 pages long, so it's a feature. But with a doc, a lot of times a short can suddenly become something longer because there's always more to explore. So can you talk about like that moment of realizing that you're making a feature, or when you realized it along the way?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I'm going to laugh because we had maybe 5 different names for this project before On the Divide that Sean is very aware of. And the reason being is that I think ultimately we did, and this is actually a really good like lesson learned moment. Ultimately, we knew we wanted to follow, you know, access in this border town of McAllen because there is only one clinic, and if it were to close, the next closest clinic is in San Antonio, which is 250 miles away, through border checkpoints. So that would affect a largely undocumented population who would not be able to go through those border checkpoints and risk deportation. So we knew that this was like definitely a region that did not get pleasant mainstream media press. Like it was always reductive in the news. And we just knew that this was like, we really loved the community organizers we met. So we knew we wanted to do it with McAllen surrounding this clinic. However, I think along the way, we let a few like early supporters, or, you know, I would say more seasoned filmmakers kind of convince us that we should do a documentary series, or the project should follow multiple clinics. And I think we were hearing like the zeitgeist right now, it was like 2014, 15, like everyone loves series, so you should make a series. And we're like, okay, we'll make a series. And so then we started pursuing a series idea. And of course, that is, I laugh now, obviously, because no one was going to give us money for a series if we hadn't even made a feature before. The Provider was a great work sample for definitely, but it definitely didn't cut it. So we were going to pitch meetings, rejected, grants, rejected. And then we had a call with Lacey Schwartz, who incredible filmmaker, created a film, Little White Lie, highly recommend it. And she was on the phone with us. She's like, wait, why don't you just make the first episode of your series, aka a feature film? And why don't you just start there? We're like, yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you, Lacey. So the first episode would have been surrounding this McAllen clinic. So that's kind of where we ended up. And then I think in that time period too, because we were focusing on different characters at the time. We were following a traveling abortion doctor, and we were following other community organizers, all who we really wish could have made it in this film. But we were seeing films that we were really inspired by, but at the time, and that's another thing that I recommend, is like reference films. Like as much as you can watch, as much as you can be inspired by, like that really was huge for us, especially because we hadn't made a feature before. So we were really inspired by some reference films that were like more character driven and verite, as opposed to like talking head, traditional doc style coverage of this topic. And so that is how we ended up following the three characters that you see. So we did pivot after we knew we were making a feature, and that's a little bit of an abridged version of how we decided.
And can I ask, sort of then moving in, I know it doesn't really happen as intentionally. I don't mean to keep like comparing narratives to docs, but it's like docs kind of like grow into the thing that they are. You know, you sort of, one person picks up a camera and just walks into a room, and then suddenly it's like, I need two people, I need, you know, I need this, I need that, and then suddenly there's a team. But how did, once you got into production or early production, how did you build out a creative team? I know to a certain extent you were a very small creative team for the majority of this time, but you've also wound up making a film where so many people have been involved and influenced and helped carve it, from musicians to editors to, you know. And so how did you go about entrusting this thing that was sort of precious to both of you to a larger group of people? How did you make those decisions? Were they people you knew? Were they people whose work that inspired you? You know, how does, I think a lot of folks who are thinking about making a feature film for the first time, it's scary because you need to invite more people into your process and you need to trust them. And so how did you guys go about curating and finding your team?
Yeah, so in the beginning, it was people we had worked with on the provider. So it was other like classmate and peers of ours who were coming down with us to McAllen. And, you know, our good friend Pete was doing some DP work, and Leah and I were still kind of co-directing at that time. And but over the years, you know, we were able to hire like a couple of other DPs, but after a while it just felt like, okay, I think to get the most intimate, you know, content or access, to get the most trust too, because sometimes when you have a big crew, right, on a doc and you're following people's lives, it can be really hard to get people to trust you because they're like, why is there this huge crew in my living room right now, right? And so Leah and I just really scaled down, and we were able to realize like, okay, we need to trust ourselves and that we can do this ourselves. And also, you know, budget constraints and all those things come into that. So yeah, it was just Leah and I for a while. And then actually in 2018, Leah's short film Death Metal Grandma got into hot docs. And she had the brilliant idea of like inviting me. She was like, yeah, why don't you come? There's also, you know, people we could potentially meet, right? And we could tell them about On the Divide, and, you know, this might be a good networking opportunity. So we went there, and it was Leah actually who emailed our producers now, Melanie Miller and Diane Becker, who are part of Fishbowl Films. She sent them an email just saying like, hey, this is our film. You know, we're looking for producers. We've been co-directing this for so long, and we don't really have that much support, right? And they took a meeting with us. So I definitely encourage people to, you know, even though those cold emails can be scary, like just reaching out to people, like sometimes they really do lead to something great. And we ended up meeting with them while we were there, and then started working with them. And then later they brought on our other producer, Amanda Spain. And then Leah actually met Elizabeth Woodward, who's our fourth producer. Takes a village to make this film. She met her working. She was Leah was assistant editor on the Vow HBO doc series, and they ended up meeting there because Elizabeth was the co-producer, I believe, or she was the associate producer on that. So that's how we brought on Elizabeth. So it's since then, you know, it's just been really helpful to have such an amazing producing team who are experienced too. It can really help us guide us throughout the process. And then also can be like mentors to us, you know, in a lot of ways. They've helped kind of advise us on certain things in terms of the next steps on what we should be doing with our career. And then also something that was really helpful was like meeting people like you, Sean, and then other advisors who are really kind of early supporters on the film. And they really helped, just like you and Ginny Redeker, and I can name, there's so many people on this film who've helped us, but they've really helped kind of give us advice of like how to move forward. And, you know, even looking at like early samples and footage and helping us troubleshoot, you know, different production issues and all of that. And then obviously through the burns too, it was so helpful. Through Creative Culture, we were also able to get like resources too, right, for free. So we were able to shoot with equipment that we could rent out from the burns when we were fellows. So yeah, there's just been so many people that have helped us along the way. And so I really encourage people who are starting out to look to like, yeah, who are mentors of theirs, whether that's like old teachers or, you know, looking into fellowships to kind of get that mentorship, or just reaching out to like experienced filmmakers, and really just looking for advice to get things started, because that I think really helped us. I don't know if Leah, you want to add anything else. Also, there's like a light thing going on in my apartment.
I think
so
it's the
like
sun.
distracting
It's just the sun
It's
moved.
the sun, but the sun moved. And I think if I open my window, it's just gonna be even more bright on my face. So
It's great.
It's the
It's like a
blinds.
textured light. It's a good.
Yeah.
I mean, listening to you, I feel like I want to talk about trust for a moment. I think especially like as first-time filmmakers, it feels difficult to find a team of people who trust your vision, right? And don't position you as somebody who's like, okay, let me show you how it goes. And I feel like there's a lot of experience when you're doing something like this for the first time in all different positions, right? It's not just like a producer's acting in that way, but like anybody on a set, you know, who knows it's your first feature can turn around and be like, yeah, I'll show you how it goes. And so, you know, what was it to like, you know, you curate your team, right? You decide, and like, so what were those challenges like, to make sure? It's hard to validate ourselves as filmmakers. You know, we often just think like, I'm pretending to be a filmmaker, or I'm still learning how to be a filmmaker. But clearly, you know, you're premiering a film at Tribeca. It's like, there's not a thing that could better say like, these people are actually filmmakers than that. So how do you keep that confidence along the way, especially like in the face of maybe folks who are seeing you as like a rookie or somebody who doesn't get it yet? That's hard, you know. I think it's worth talking about, because I think everybody, especially underrepresented filmmakers in this industry, experience that in a real way, and it's worth talking about.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And yeah, so we were very, you know, fortunate in that Amanda, Di, Mel, who are seasoned producers, never made us feel like we didn't know what we were doing. And they also kind of came on as like a mentor role, as Maya said. So that was something that felt good, and like a collaboration that felt good. And I think also Maya and I have been on sets, and we've been on shoots or projects where there was definitely like patronizing actions, or like cishet white men who were abusive and toxic and all the things you hear about, we witnessed. So we knew that like we wanted, when we were able to build our team out, we were getting funding, we knew we wanted to work with people who are also emerging, or whatever that means. And kind of like, you know, as Issa Rae has said, higher across. And so we were really excited to work with Berenice Chavez. As her first feature film as an editor, and she's an extremely talented editor. Obviously you've seen the film, or hopefully you'll see the film, and she is extremely talented. And she's also around our age. This is also her first feature. It's Elizabeth's first feature. Gisela, who was our associate producer in McAllen, they came onto this project too, and were an incredible asset. And also first feature credit as an associate producer, also someone that Maya met through Brown Girls Doc Mafia, amongst I think a few other groups. So that is a huge, like, Brown Girls Doc Mafia. I'm not a part of it in an official capacity, obviously, but I recommend anyone who, is from a women of color or non-binary people of color in the doc community, join that group. Huge asset. Fully support that group. And so anyway, groups like that exist. And there's other groups like the Video Consortium where we've, met people to hire for shoots here and there. And then our story editor or story producer, excuse me, Marina Nieto, she came in through Melanie, and I think also was it her first feature film? I think it was. I can't confirm that, but I'm pretty sure it was one of her early first feature. And so just being able to like work up this industry with other people that you really admire and like trust, and there isn't like a huge ego attached at that point too, and we're all like in it for the same reasons, and just like making sure you're working with people like that, and definitely goes a long way. And you don't need a big name attached to your project to get it done. So we're really lucky we had this great team. And then our composers, Jeff and Judy, who came on basically in-kind services. So if you can find in-kind support from people, Jeff and Judy were professors at where we went to school at the college, and they really believed in this project, wanted to support reproductive rights. So I think, it's definitely an asset to ask people for in-kind services too, if you're at a point where you don't have any funding. And if you know friends who compose or make music, or ask them. So we have a really good team. I'm really happy and proud of our team.
I think, the Issa Rae quote that you share of hiring across. I mean, I think there's also an energy to other people who are looking to break out at a similar moment as you are in your own career. It's like, and lassoing that, right? Getting those people together instead of having this staggered approach where there are people who are further along or people who are maybe like could potentially be too green, and finding like some obstacles in translation there. It's nice to know like we're all ready, we have the skill set, we haven't made our name on a film, this is the one, let's go. There's a certain excitement around that. And I think it also brings together future collaborators. We were so used to seeing directors and producers and cinematographers and composers, everybody, right, who continue to work together because they kind of cut their teeth together on an initial project. So that's really exciting to hear. Two kind of questions that will get us through like production and then post. Kind of the same question, but let's start with production. Is just, you just don't know, especially with the doc, you never know what the film is going to be. So what were the compromises that you sort of had to make along the way? And also kind of how did the film just change on you along the way? Like you're in production, you're going down there, you're shooting. I'm sure you'll share also that you were shooting this kind of like out of pocket for a multitude of years, and then at a certain phase suddenly support showed up, but it didn't show up for a very long time. But how did the film itself feel like? I mean, you mentioned that you pitched it as a series and then eventually it was a doc, but also just on the ground, how did the story shift and how did you respond to something that was evolving on you?
Yeah, so the film, like we've said, has been many different ideas, probably could be seven different films. But when we first went to McAllen, we thought like, okay, we're going to be following this clinic. We'll probably be filming inside the clinic. There was a Supreme Court case that was happening, Whole Woman's Health versus Hellerstedt, which was like one of the biggest cases at the time since Roe v. Wade. So we really felt like, oh, okay, maybe we'll follow this case as well, and like what happens, what will the verdict be. So we had filmed inside the clinic. We had met with the CEO of Whole Woman's Health. We had met with lawyers and all, we basically had just filmed everyone because we were like, okay, what kind of trying to search for like what is our anchor here, right? But I really think it was after meeting Ray is a security guard, and he's one of the earlier people that we met. It was actually like one of the first shoots that we did. We really felt like drawn to his story because he immediately like opened up about how he was randomly assigned there. I won't give too much away. I think people have seen the film already, but there's just a lot of things he was opening up as the security guard there at the clinic, and having to deal with the protesters outside and all of that. And I think, you know, he hadn't really been able to share those stories, so it was kind of like the first time for him to be able to talk about that and the things that he's been through. And so we were immediately drawn to him. We were like, okay, we got to follow up with him, because we had never seen a story about reproductive rights that focused on, like, you know, a 67-year-old Latino man, right? Like, we had never seen something that showed how he also had a stake in this issue around abortion rights, and around access and choice. And so, you know, he was someone early on that we wanted to film. But then we didn't end up meeting Mercedes and Denise until 2017. And it was really after filming with them for a while that we realized, like, okay, I think this might be the story, right? We had seen, there's been a number of amazing films, like Leah mentioned, reference films, other films on abortion that have focused inside the clinic, right? Or focused on legislation. And all of those are really important and informative films. But we had never seen a film that really focused on, like, the verite version of abortion access, right? Like, what was it like for 3 Latinx people on the ground in McAllen, and how do they have to navigate choice in their daily lives, right? And, you know, we kept following up with Mercedes and Denise and Ray. They kept giving us access too, and we just kept developing relationship, and we realized, like, you know, this might be the story. And it's hard because, you know, we talk a lot about in doc of, like, killing your darlings. That happens in narrative too, right? Where it's like, you're like, oh, but I really love this other person we were filming, or this scene, or I want to be able to put it in this context. And that can be really hard, but you really have to, you know, focus in on, like, okay, where is the story taking us, right? Who's following up with us too, right? Because it's a real thing to have reluctant characters in doc, where, you know, people who are just like, and they might have an amazing story, but, like, they don't want to work with you. And, like, you just have to be okay with that, right? And you can't, like, squeeze that out of them. But we really felt like, you know, we were building this relationship with Ray, Mercedes, and Denise, and we were following them as they were navigating all these things that were happening, all the restrictive access that was happening to them and their community. And so just naturally we decided, like, hey, we're going to focus on them. Even though we had filmed a lot inside the clinic and had, you know, gotten all those interviews with clinic workers and everything, we just felt like the story was leading us to them. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it came down to, like, okay, who are you really following up with a lot, and who are the people that you feel like haven't been seen on screen as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it definitely does. And it's interesting how Ray, whose story is like the inverse of Mercedes in a way, in a very broad way, right? Somebody who's coming from a sort of pro-life space, religious space, who then suddenly shifts his perspective because he's working at this as a security guard at this clinic and understands in a deeper way. And that almost leads Mercedes to become maybe a more compelling character to you for your film, because suddenly she becomes a really interesting counterpoint to Ray's experience as somebody who was coming from a more pro-choice sort of progressive space, and then found herself into a pro-life, you know, more kind of like fundamentalist or whatever space with the folks who are protesting outside. Can you talk? I mean, I'm being presumptuous that Ray, you know, Ray's the easier character initially to shoot with, because what he has learned and how he has changed aligns closer with who your own personal beliefs. It's like, oh, he's opening his mind to and learning and expanding his understanding and deepening his understanding to learn things that I think people need to learn. Mercedes is kind of going in a different direction, right? So that's a character that might be getting further and further away from your own belief system or your own sense of self. And so, like, how do you treat Mercedes with dignity, you know, like give her allow her to be really complex, and also build trust there, especially since in the film there are, I mean, more so than any, well, both Ray and Mercedes go through very intense emotional moments that you are right there for, and that, I mean, to be in the room or to be in the car with someone at that moment means that they have to really trust that you're there and not feel like you're just there for a story, that you're actually there in some supportive way. But it's really, I think it's really unique and important to the film that these are people who are, you know, working through their own things, but are in different belief systems. And yet you're able to be right next to both of them without that being a challenge or being, you know, you're not. So anyways, it's not so much a question, but it's just like, could you talk a little bit about that? Because it is on the divide. This is like an issue where people are always very entrenched in their beliefs. And there aren't very many folks, it would seem, that shift across that understanding to a new understanding. And yet you focus your film around some characters who do. And yeah, so how do you do that with somebody like Mercedes, who I feel like from outside would be really difficult, because she's saying things where you're like, where I would be, I'll use I language, where I would be like, I don't agree with that, but I want to give you space and room to express yourself.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thanks for the observation.
It's nice for you to say it wasn't even there was no question in there.
No, I think there was a little. Yeah, you know, the from the beginning, even before we had a little distraction with the series idea, Maya and I were interested in sharing stories not only that we hadn't seen, but also that were complex. I mean, I know like the real kind of like there was many inceptions on the divide, but one of the inceptions was we had met a woman in front of a Dallas clinic who was a volunteer clinic escort and was pro-choice or identified that way, but she didn't tell her church community what she did, and so she had this other kind of world that nobody knew about, and that was what initially intrigued Maya and I, because or one of the reasons that intrigued us, because we were just realizing there's so many people that are on this continuum of viewpoints, and a lot of people fall somewhere in between. And I think we had been just seeing a lot of echo chambers happening in terms of the dialogue around reproductive rights. And you had a binary, either you're pro-life or pro-choice, and you kind of stayed in those like identities. And we want to acknowledge, obviously they have very political ramifications, those two words, and like there are political, like very serious legislative and political things happening right now that have to do with like identifying either pro-life, pro-choice. However, in order for us to like tell the story we wanted to tell, we wanted the people in the film to share their story. Like that is like the way that we feel like empathy can be exercised the most, is like you're on a journey with them. So when you see how their views adapt or change, you understand why. You're not just like, all right, you're in this binary box, you know. These people in the film, they break the boxes, they break them open, and there are many boxes for people, but at the end of the day, obviously, like we show, and I think the film shows, that choice is important. And what does choice mean when you don't have options is like the question that we're asking. So while, yeah, we didn't focus on the legislative session, we didn't focus on the Supreme Court case, but I think through being with these people, occupying space and time with them, and seeing what they have to deal with and how they don't have many choices and what they're kind of up against, I think it gives people a little bit more insight. And so if you identify one way or another, or you're somewhere in between, you can find something, or hopefully you can take away something, not only if you see it in yourself and somebody in our film, but if you want to have a conversation with somebody you see it's someone like somebody you see in the film who might be your family member, might be you, might be your grandma, your grandpa, your uncle, your aunt. And we hope this film will be the dialogue that you can start with them that doesn't feel preachy or didactic. Because ultimately, yeah, there's a lot of serious, unfortunately, as people know, SB 8 was just passed in Texas, abortion ban after 6 weeks. It's like, it's awful. So I think we need to be having these conversations in politics, but also within our own families, within our worlds too. Yeah, I'm sure Maya would, do you want to add anything, Maya?
Oh, I mean, I think you said it best. I just think that like in terms of filming with Mercedes and Ray in particular, like, yeah, like I think obviously going into this, I can only speak for myself. I didn't necessarily like agree with what Mercedes was preaching, but I learned through building a relationship and trust with her that the reason, like why she got here, right? How she found community in the church. And so I think that her story really challenged me in a lot of ways. And like Leah was saying, I think it was really important for us to just show the humanity in people, right? Show them for who they are. Let's ask them questions like, what do you feel like is being left out of the story? And I think we were really able to get some really important, insightful commentary that way, just by asking that question. You know, this isn't about Mercedes, but just one of the first conversations I had with one of the clinic administrators was that exactly, like, you know, I'm not an expert on what's going on here. Like, can you let me know, like, what do you feel like the mainstream media is leaving out? And she was like, oh, no one's ever asked me that question before, right? So I think for both Leah and I, right, like we're not from the area. I'm a Latino filmmaker, but I'm not from the border. So it was really important for both of us to just really hear from everyone, like, hey, let us know what you feel like is missing here, right? Because I think there's just they've dealt with so many reporters coming in and just wanting to get a certain narrative, right? Wanting to get a certain story, and not many people are listening to the people there. So I think that was an interesting challenge for me, at least, was to challenge my views around, you know, like my like assumptions of what a pro-life person might be like, and really be able to just film with Mercedes in this way that all of that, I just, you know, just put that aside for a second and really was able to like see her for who she is and realize that like people can change. I think that was a big thing too that we really wanted to highlight in this film, that's like, you aren't just one way, and there's a lot of gray area within this debate, and Mercedes is someone that you'll see like transforms in a big way in terms of her views. So yeah, there's just, I think that all really helped in terms of just being able to film with her and realize that she was going through a lot. So we also just like wanted to, you know, there's obviously boundaries you need to set with like the support system, but also just, you know, wanting to be there, not just be like a camera in front of her, but like also be able to let her know like, hey, we're here for you. Like we can talk through things. And if you like really need support, we can try to help you.
I appreciate that. I want to ask one more question, but I mean, I think some of what you guys are talking about and describing in your own process is something that really pushes back on just a lot of what's just in the world today, which is like we're very polarized, and I think sometimes we're even very far away from the events that we have really strong opinions on, or the, you know, the being on the ground or in space. And sometimes, and when we meet people who are on the front lines, they have much different there's just different nuances, you know. It's like to living through things, and there's a spectrum of opinions and a spectrum of lived experiences, and whatever we can do to kind of bridge that gap or get closer to, as you described, like the humanity, and building empathy with folks, even if some of those folks have ideas and thoughts that are a little different from us. I mean, it gives us, just by proximity, it gives us the opportunity to have like real conversations. And I think your film, both in terms of its structure, but also in your practice, and your willingness to build trust and really just be compassionate and there for people, even if you didn't fully align with them, is a really important model for how we should just be thinking about the world around us, because that's the only way we're gonna kind of learn together, is if we have those conversations instead of being in our camps, you know, shouting to people who already agree with us. So the final question I would ask you guys is just about getting the word out about your film, and like choosing how do you choose how to distribute it? I know you're in the middle of this, and you're sort of making decisions, and you know, with a film, especially a film surrounding the subject matter, it's you want to get word out, and there's also increasingly more and more urgency around it as history unfolds around us. So how do you make those decisions to make sure you're sharing the film, you're sharing it through the right ways? What is that process like for you? And where does that kind of leave you at today, where we're interviewing you still like mid-process, even though the film's already premiered and been finalized, you're still carrying this film because the process of making a film lives on way beyond its world premiere at a festival.
And I know, like, we've been doing like a back and forth, so I'm like, whose turn is it? Yeah, we are really lucky. Like Melanie Miller, Diane, and Amanda and Elizabeth have like a lot of experience with distribution as our producers. So we've really been relying on them to know what's best for this film, because they know the landscape really well. But we did always know that we wanted to be on POV with PBS. Like we wanted it to be accessible and free to watch. So we're excited that that's going to happen. And the date is 99% set for April 18th. And so if you have, I don't even know if I'm allowed to announce this, but whatever. If you have channel 13 PBS, it should be free. If you have any type of TV or access online, you can watch it. So that is exciting for us, because we want the barriers to access to not exist for watching this film. And I'm glad that it's being screen free at NIFTY right now, which is awesome. Shout out to NIFTY. And then, we have a festival circuit. We want it to get into various communities. So we're playing in all pockets of the world right now, which is really cool. Like I'm going to Poland in 2 weeks, and I'm from Poland, and Maya's going to come back to another Poland film festival. And so it's like, it's exciting to be able to share it with communities that are also in their own way dealing with other reproductive rights issues, if you're following what's happening in Poland right now. But so, it is exciting to do it that way, but also I think we do want to partner with the streamer at some point to get an even wider reach. And yeah, it's definitely like that strategy question is something that's ever evolving. We're always talking about it on our group meetings. And I think it's like, someone once asked me best too, like, would you rather get money or would you rather get views? Because it's a little hard to get both. So not that is a question that we've been asking a lot, but I think, of course, like our answer would be views. Like we want it to be seen by as many people as possible, especially now. And then we have an impact campaign that we're planning with Pieces Loud and Picture Motion and Policy and Focus. And we're working with Good Docs on educational. So there's like people are coming at this from all different directions. And like Maya and I are not experts in any of this. So we are hiring people for this stuff. We're raising money for people to do this work because we definitely cannot do this all on our own. While we have a vision for what we want this film to do, like we rely on experts to do what they do best. So yeah, I would say, when you get to that point, congratulations. And then, definitely look at the great organizations that exist and the infrastructure that exists to get the word out for your film and what's meaningful for you and the success that you would define for your film.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, I think something that was also helpful for us at this stage that we're in, I mean, even right before this stage, like when we were kind of in post still, was being able to go to pitch forums too and meet with different industry, right? Meet with different streamers, like we were able to meet with Hulu at Sundance. I don't know if we can say, but whatever. There's different, there's industry people that come. And so we were able to set up meetings like that and pitch the film to them, right? And pique their interest. And then, you should always like follow up with a sample or have the sample ready to show them there. If the film is done, even better, people love that. And if you can send them like a screener of the close to finished product, that's always great. I mean, obviously get into a shape where you're like, okay, I would want to present this to like a streamer or whoever, the distributor. That is always really helpful. Having your deck ready and all of those different things, like people want to see that. And something else that we didn't really go through, like we're kind of trying to figure out if we're gonna do this, but this is just helpful for anyone else who's kind of navigating this landscape. Once your film is done, is like starting to meet with sales agents too, of like where you can sell the film, if you're interested in like foreign distribution, you know, those are, all of those things are like important to look into. And again, like Leah said, like look to the experts around you to help you with that. Like this is both of our first features, so we're just learning so much, and so it's so important to, if you are lucky to work with like experienced producing team, like look to them for guidance of like, hey, what do you think is best right now? Do we need a sales agent? Do we not? You know, all of those things, they're going to help, hopefully help guide you in the right way. So yeah, look to the people around you for help. But again, like pitch forums were super helpful for us, not even just at this stage, but also like in production as well, just to start meeting with people, getting the word out about our film. And although it can be challenging and frustrating at times of like, we're meeting with all these people, we keep pitching this, we keep saying the same thing over and over again, and like we're not getting any traction, like you will see that eventually like it will be helpful, because this person will be like, oh, I remember your film at that last pitch forum, or like I've met you here, da, da, da. And then eventually like we were able to get Field of Vision funding, and that was actually because we had met with Charlotte Cook at the women, what was it called? It was like the Sundance Women Intensive pitch forum. Maybe Leah knows the right way to say it, but it was, yeah, it was an amazing like forum that we were able to pitch and get feedback on our pitch. And then we ended up reconnecting with her at the Film Independent Pitch Forum. And it was kind of an surreal experience, because it was like an early 7 a.m. meeting for me, and Leah like couldn't get on the call for some reason. I was like, oh no, like whatever, she probably just wants to know an update, so I'll just give her the update. And like did not think that she'd be like, yeah, you know, I scheduled this meeting because I remember this film, like this is such an incredible film, and like we want to offer you all funding. And I was like, what, is this real? Like they like talk about how like this is the goal of a pitch forum, but you never think that's going to happen. So, but that was because we had met with her previously, we had pitched her the film, she had seen the progress. So even though it can feel like nothing's happening with these pitches, eventually it'll get you somewhere, because people will see that you're motivated and you're sticking with it.
Mm-hmm. That's super helpful. I mean, I think that everything that you shared today, and for those who are watching, I mean, it's like by the end of this process, you're fortified, you've sponged up so much of an understanding of what it is to lift a feature, and obviously that informs you going forward with engaging with really any project, of course, because not only do you have this network of people who you've now collaborated with and industry folks who you have contacts with, but you also just have gone through the experience and kind of know where there are kind of stressful points that are just going to be there, you know. And it's like, and it's hard when you're going through something the first time to not think like the sky's falling or whatever, and realize that like it's part of a process, which is always a bumpy ride. But then the other thing that I just want to highlight before we go is that you doing these interviews, you know, you're now in a position where then you become the same thing to others and to younger filmmakers that you have described today, that you're kind of your collaborators and producers and mentors and people who have been through this before were for you. And I think that that's, you know, that's the incredible thing about this industry, and it's recognizing that generosity allows for that kind of understanding and knowledge to get passed along, so that everybody has an opportunity if they have a really good story to tell. So I appreciate both of you sort of carrying that mantle as well. You know, it's definitely a passing it along experience. So with that, I just want to thank both of you for spending the time from different parts of the world with us today. I really appreciate you giving us an opportunity to look behind the curtain at On the Divide. And for those who haven't seen it, please see it. For those who have seen it, thank you so much for watching it. And please, as Leah prompted, have these conversations that you're having in your head with other people in your home and in your community. Hey, Dan.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you so much, Leah, Maya, and Sean, for that amazing conversation. I learned some stuff, and having seen your film, I was really excited to hear more about how it was made. And all the best to both of you as you continue to tour this film. And everybody needs to watch it, watch it during the summit, or watch it when it's on POV, watch it at a festival, see it on a big screen, see it with people, safely, of course, if it's safe to do so in your area. Thank you all so much for joining today, and thanks to you folks tuning in, watching, and please check out more of the National Youth Filmmaker Summit.